Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time out, we are joined by a very special guest. Mike Keneally is here. Mike,
hey, Mitch.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no problem.
Glad to have you here.
Yeah,
multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, touring musician, album-producing maven. I think you're one of the most prolific musicians we've had on the Sweetwater Minute.
It's an absurd amount of albums at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking through your discography, and let alone all of your work, all the people you've worked with, is really astounding.
I'm grateful about all that.
Yeah,
it's been an interesting career thus far.
No doubt. Frank Zappa, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Andy Partridge, Andy West, the list, Henry Kaiser, the list goes on and on and on of the tremendous musicians, plus all the solo stuff that you did. Death Clock,
right?
Can't forget that.
Yeah.
Tremendous things going on there. How'd you get started? How did you get into to doing all that?
I guess just in terms of starting to play music at all was my dad recognizing something in me that made him get me a little electric organ for my 7th birthday, and as soon as I saw it, I connected with it right away. Started playing melodies on it. It just made sense. So that was the beginning of the whole rigmarole, and then started playing guitar 4 years later. And then as I was growing up, just sort of divided my attention between the two instruments, and really loved them both, and still don't really think of myself as one or the other. I'm grateful to be able to call on both things for whatever the situation might be. And then I got older. My brother also played guitar, so when we were teenagers, we had a Tascam reel-to-reel tape recorder that we would attempt to recreate our favorite songs on. So we were just in there recording Jeff Beck songs and Yes and Return to Forever and Gentle Giant and all this crazy stuff in the most sort of innocent and untrained way possible. We would try to replicate the records.
Right.
And and that was just so early on. I really was fascinated by just dissecting these records that I loved. Just try to figure out what makes them tick, how to put them together. So I was primarily self-taught in that way, and one of my favorite things to do was to try to figure out Zappa compositions, because they were so intricate and fascinating and so much fun to me. So without realizing it, I was kind of doing job prep all that time. I just thought I was having fun, but it set me in good stead when I finally got the opportunity to audition for them, and I because I was self-taught, it meant that I didn't spend a lot of time looking at charts or trying to seek out written music. I was always learning stuff off of records. And I think that helped develop my ear in a way that I just absorbed his material. And so I had a lot of his stuff, even without consciously realizing I was memorizing it. I was memorizing it.
Right.
So at the audition, he would just say, "Do you know this song? Do you know this song?" And I'd say, "Well, give me a second." And I would just call it up from the memory banks and be able to play it for him. And he was very intrigued by that ability, and that came in handy during rehearsals. That was a big band. That was his last band in 1988, and it was a 12-piece band, the 5-piece horn section. And sometimes he would say, for instance, there was a song on one of his very early Mothers of Invention albums called "Who Needs the Peace Corps," and he hadn't played it live in 20 years or something, and so he just at one day at rehearsal, he said, "You know what? I think it would be interesting if we played 'Who Needs the Peace Corps.' I think that would sound good." And then he just turned and looked at me and waited for me to start playing it. And I'd say, "Okay," and then we would, because we didn't even have like the records or the CDs at rehearsal. He was just sort of like calling on me to be able to bring this stuff up, and that was a real privilege. The fact that he was sort of relying on my memory of the material, and then he would extrapolate from that and create arrangements on the spot for this 12-piece band.
Wow.
And as a fan, that was a huge thing for me, because it meant I was able to help in a concrete way to bring these classic old songs back into the repertoire that he hadn't touched on in a long time.
Right.
So that was a privilege, and of course it was just an unbelievable thing to actually go on the road and play his music, and even just to hear him every night, much less be in the band, was a privilege. So,
had to be amazing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he was it for me when I was growing up. I was a lot of music that I loved, but he definitely sat at the top of the heap. So it was a crazy thing that in some ways I still can't believe happened.
Right. Is it true that the story that you basically called him up and said, "Hey, if you ever need anybody, I know all your stuff.
That was basically what happened, yeah. And I was fortunate that the guy that I spoke to on the phone believed me and passed it on to Frank. And Frank called me back the next day and said, "You know all my stuff? I don't believe you. You know, get over here and prove it."
Wow.
And so that was a challenge
Right.
that I was happy to take. And it all worked out. I was really nervous. At one point, he asked me to at the audition if I would harmonize with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sang something in harmony, and afterwards he goes, our voices blend pretty well, but you've got this kind of thing in your voice. I'm not so sure about that. And I said, don't worry, it's not there all the time. It's the special little flavor that only happens when I am scared out of my wits. But it all worked out. You know, I was really happy, and it ended up being his last tour, unfortunately. But you know, I consider myself so fortunate that I was able to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And a lot of connections came from that. Didn't you
Pretty
make the
much
connection
everything,
with,
you know. It's I can kind of say that if it weren't for that I wouldn't have gone on to play with Steve Vai, which was sort of my next major. Well, I ended up playing in Dweezil's band for years after you know, Frank stopped touring, and then that stopped in 1996. And after a couple of months, Steve Vai called and asked if I would join his band, and I was in his band for 6 years, during which we started doing the G3 tours with Satriani, and that's when Joe found out about me, which then led to years later Joe calling me up and asking if I would join his band, and so it's all and that's still going strong. This just last week, the Satriani's new album, which is called Shockwave Supernova, just came out, and it's the third record I've made with him. You know, none of that would have happened if it weren't for Frank. So you know, I have a lot to be grateful for. And then you know, the Death Clock thing, which is this, you know, you familiar with Metalocalypse?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a trip. And Brendan Small, who created that show, I met him on MySpace of all things 9 years ago. Back when that was still happening. It was my girlfriend saying, "Hey, Brendan's on MySpace." We were huge fans of this show that Brendan did called Home Movies. It's a really, really funny cartoon, really just super clever and interesting. And the main character on that show is a little kid named Brendan Small. It's like a fictionalized version of him. We just loved that show. So Sarah, my girlfriend, says, "Hey, you should send Brendan a message on MySpace and just say hi." You know. So I wrote him and said, "Hey, you know, my girlfriend and I love your show, and I just wanted to say hi. You know, I don't know if you have any idea who I am, but I'm just saying howdy." And he writes back, "Dude, I'm a huge fan. When I was a student at Berkeley in the 90s, you came and did a clinic there, and that was like a major thing for me." So he goes, "Hey, we should get together and you know, just hang out." And also, I'm working on this new show. It looks like it's going to be ridiculous. It's about metal, and you know, okay. Nice. And then the show comes out. It's a huge success. They put out a record of music from the show that turns into the best-selling death metal album ever. And he needs to form a band to play the stuff live. And so he asked if I would be interested. I think if we weren't like just pals, he might not have asked me. But he had never been in like a band situation before, even though he's an amazing guitar player, amazing musician, and a completely hysterically funny guy. The whole thing of just being in a band and being on stage was kind of new to him. So I think he wanted to kind of surround himself with people that he felt comfortable with. Because I don't have, up to that point, I didn't have any kind of a metal pedigree, you know. Although I dig it. So you know, he just said, "Oh, you can do it. It'll be fine." You know, and he taught me all the stuff, and that was really cool because it stretched my musicianship in areas that it hadn't, you know, gone before. I sort of approached it with Vi, but you know, Steve isn't a metal musician either. He utilizes aspects of it, but his compositional ambitions are you know, super all over the place. So with Death Clock, it's this really focused thing, and people just go out of their minds at the shows. It's so much fun. And
you're playing while there's a screen behind you with the animation,
huge LED screen hanging up behind and above us, which is really the visual focal point of the show. We're mainly in the dark. We're all wearing black, and there's not a lot of stage lighting. and everything that we're playing is also has a corollary up on the video screen. Sometimes it's animation of the animated death clock playing the same song, and sometimes it's some kind of narrative thing.
Right.
But Gene Hoglan, a masterful drummer in the band,
Sure.
has got headphones on. He's listening to cues and the click, and that keeps us locked to whatever's happening on the screen.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you how that syncs up.
Yeah. Now he's the one who's got the hard job.
Right.
He has to listen to everything and make sure we're in line. All we have to do is play along with the drummer.
Right.
So if something goes wrong, he's the first one who knows and starts screaming about it. And none of us know if anything is if there's anything to panic about until we notice that Gene is yelling at the monitor engineer or something.
We've had Gene here before. He's done an interview with us.
Such a great guy.
As has Joe Satriani's been here as well and does interviews. So
super cool.
Many of the people from your circle have been here one way or the other.
No, it's kind of it's been fun too because I've sort of like helped to tie some of these disparate worlds together, and now Brendan and Satriani hang out and stuff. It's really fun.
Right. So coming up, it's rare it's not super uncommon to find someone who plays keyboards and guitar, but it's very rare to find somebody who's so proficient on both of them. How did you balance the two when you're learning the two instruments?
Well, I started on keyboard, and that's the only instrument I ever had any training on. I had organ lessons when I was a kid, and that was super helpful in terms of getting some of the basics of theory under my fingers. But then when I wanted to play guitar, rather than taking guitar lessons, I just tried to take the knowledge from keyboard and transfer that to the guitar. And the way I could do that was to just sort of look at each string on the guitar as a separate keyboard, which it is in a way. So, it's just, each string is just a chromatic instrument starting on a different note. Right. So it was slow going, but I managed to piece together. So okay, I understand how this interval works now. If I know that this starts here, and whereas keyboard is a very linear instrument, and I was able to look at it and sort of see music on it right away. Right. With guitar, was a little more challenging, but it just was a trial and error thing, and it was a passion thing because I loved it so much. I grew up loving so much guitar music. The first music I ever heard and saw that had a major impact on me was the Beatles when I was a kid. They just looked like they were gods holding these magic talismans. Those guitars had so much energy, and I wanted to be a part of that. But at the same time, I was like completely enamored of progressive rock, and the first I heard Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer on the radio when I was 9 or whatever, which is the same age I was when I first heard Zappa, and so I was pretty equally enchanted by keyboard-oriented music and guitar-oriented music. So it's just the question of, okay, I'm going to spend this much time devoting to this instrument, and then I'll spend this much time devoted to that instrument, and I was just excited by the fact that both were available to me, and I was equally fascinated by both of them. Right. And it's kind of still the same, if we're here doing this workshop today, and I'm rapidly going from doing guitar tracks and then go get on the piano and do that, and it's so fun because I'm like, I hear things in my head that I have to try to get out one way or another, and it's instantaneous when you can kind of take care of it yourself. So,
do you use one more for writing than the other?
I probably more often reach for a guitar just because it's you can carry it around with you, and it's handy. Right. I write really different on both instruments, so I can always hear the difference between a piano song and a guitar song, and I feel as though I want to, when I do my next big chunk of writing, I'll probably do something that's more keyboard oriented because I've been focusing compositionally more on the guitar lately. That's kind of the way it goes. It's just like you just vibe it out. It's like right now I can feel myself drawn to composing more stuff on keyboard. So next time I feel like writing, that's probably what I'll do.
Right. So I think one of the shortest songs I've seen you clock in is on Hat, is 7 seconds long. And you've written concept albums. A Scambot album is more of a concept kind of, the trilogy, the To Be trilogy is kind of a concept. And you've also done orchestral music and performed with orchestras in very long pieces. Do you approach writing them differently, or what is your mindset when you go into saying, I'm going to write an orchestral piece versus this is only going to be 7 seconds long?
Well, the 7 second long vibe, and actually, and I'm working on Scambot 2 right now, and there's going to be a second disc of additional music from Scambot 2, and there's a 5 second song on that. So
okay.
I managed to beat my record. You know, it's every song just sort of insists on what it wants to be, and sometimes I'll compose something that I know is just punctuation. It's just meant to be an event that happens between two, you know, real songs, and it's just a thing that's designed to get a reaction, or just to make you laugh, or just to say, I can't believe that a 5 second song just happened. That sort of thing tickles me because it's absurd, you know.
Right.
And the orchestral thing, I don't often just sit down and decide to write something for orchestra. If I hadn't gotten a commission to write something for orchestra, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I was grateful that there was this Dutch radio producer named Co de Kloot, producer and presenter for National Public Radio in the Netherlands, who was a really good friend of Frank's, and took an interest in my career, probably the first person in Europe to do so, you know, and really early on, and when he was in touch with the Metropole Orchestra, this is an incredibly versatile and very busy orchestra. The Snarky Puppy just put out an album with the Metropole, and they made records with Elvis Costello and Todd Rundgren and all kinds of people. Suggested me to them, and they went for it. You know, so I was grateful to compose this piece called "The Universe Will Provide," which is a 13 movement suite for orchestra and electric guitar with me as soloist, and I had never composed for orchestra before, so it was super challenging, and I had, you know, very able assistance from my friend Chris Opperman, who it was, you know, I wouldn't have been able to get the orchestrations done if it weren't for him. He did the majority of the hard labor in making that stuff happen.
Right.
But it's just sort of an outgrowth of what I'm always interested in compositionally, which is I always just want to write things I've never heard before. And so when I was coming up with ideas for the orchestra, it's just sort of just an expanded version of what I do all the time, but just with far more varied and extensive orchestrational possibilities and colors available, and you know, and real woodwinds and strings as opposed to synthesized, which is you know, great.
Right.
And then it's just so exhilarating to actually hear the stuff come together, and a challenge performance-wise to play electric guitar with an orchestra. There's definitely, you know, you got to strike that balance where you're not just running roughshod over all these delicate orchestrational ideas, which is way too easy to do with an electric guitar and an amplifier.
Right.
But you also don't want to. The other extreme is where you turn down so much in order to be polite that you don't get any kind of a satisfying sensation from playing the instrument. So, you know, every you know, Steve Vai has done a bunch of stuff with orchestra, and he has to deal with it too. It's just this really tricky balancing act that you have to do.
Right.
So it's challenging, but it's so worthwhile when you can make it work.
I would assume it's a little easier to integrate that, given that you actually wrote the music and know. Did you allow yourself room?
Yeah. I mean, the model for it, you know, what I had going conceptually was something like, you know, like I love the album Miles Ahead by Miles Davis, Gil Evans wrote the orchestration for, and the trumpet, which is the solo voice, just sort of floats through the whole thing, you know. And I was trying to do something like that with my piece, where it's, it's this voice that is almost like a narrator, that just like returns and says what it has to say, and then steps back. Moments where it's completely composed, other moments where it's entirely improvised, but you have to be real cognizant of the orchestration and the shifting harmonic content that's going on behind you. You can't just blow. It's and at the same time you're just trying to maintain this compositional mind where things stay balanced and somehow essentially correct.
Sure.
It was a lot of work, but it was really, really satisfying. And we've performed it live several times, and I had to do it a couple of times with the Metropole live. And it was 3 years after the album came out that I returned over there and performed it live with them again. And I felt like that's when we finally nailed it in terms of live performance. It's something like that. It's such an expensive proposition to do a live performance with an orchestra that it's not like going on the road with a band where in the second week of the tour you finally hit your stride. You got to try to hit your stride right away, and there's so many elements that need to be dealt with that it's not necessarily going to work out that way.
Right.
But it was fun, and actually a few years ago I performed the piece with an American. An orchestra from Cal Arts in California, student orchestra, and that was in some ways the most satisfying of all. Even though this was a group of very young musicians that weren't nearly as seasoned as the Metropole, they were so enthused by it, and also I just felt like after finally having 3 shots of performing this thing live that I finally found a way to really exist in this environment in a way that was satisfying. I hope I get a chance to do it again.
Oh, yeah.
It's really, really fun.
Absolutely. So you used the word balance, and I'm intrigued looking at all that you do. It would appear, just kind of looking at various timelines, that a lot of that stuff has to be happening simultaneously, whether it's writing songs with Andy Partridge at the same time as you're working with Joe Satriani, at the same time as Death Clock, at the same time as you're working on Scambot, at the same time as you're doing other projects, and Beer for Dolphins and all those things. How do you balance all those? How do you keep your mind straight and say, okay, today I'm writing this song for this?
You just, if you're smart, you write everything on the calendar so that when you wake up, okay, this is the day that I have to do this, and try to maintain some kind of a grasp on what's coming so that you don't get caught unawares. Like I know, when I get home from Sweetwater, I'm spending the next week finishing Scambot 2. Because I really, really want that album out. I've been working on it for a long, long time, and we're very close to the end in terms of doing the mixes. So I really want to complete that. I'm excited for people to hear it, and I want it off my plate. I want to not be thinking about making an album for a while. Because it's been for like 23 years now. That's always in the back of my mind. I got to get this album done. I got to get this album done, no matter what else is going on. Album is always sort of like yelling in the background.
Right.
So for once, I'd like to not be thinking about making an album. See what that's like. Because I have a big pile of albums at this point.
Yes, you do.
And I would love. It's more than enough of a body of work for people to find out about and discover. I don't need to continually keep adding to it. I'm thrilled about Scambot 2. Once that's completed, I will be happy to let the body of work speak for itself for a while at least, and then I go right on the road with Satriani. We're starting the next touring cycle for the album that just came out, so we'll be in Europe for 2 months, starting in mid-September, and then in February we're doing the U.S. for 2 months, and then as next year continues, we'll be doing shorter stints in Australia, New Zealand, and South America, and returning to Europe to do festivals there in the summer next year and stuff. So it's I know that all this stuff is coming, and that I have to be prepared for it. Like what I'm thinking about now is, I got to finish Scambot, but at some point I also need to find out from Joe what songs we're playing on the tour so I can start practicing them. We have a rehearsal period that's in the first week of September, and I want to make sure that I'm ready for that when it happens.
Right.
I also want to take a vacation in August, which I don't do very often. My girlfriend and I want to just get away for a week and not think about anything. You know?
Right. Right.
So you have to schedule time for that, or it'll never happen. And which unfortunately, that's my tendency usually. Yeah, we'll take a vacation one of these days, and then the calendar fills up with work and more work. You know.
Right.
I'm grateful to be busy. I'm super happy that there's work. That I'll never be ungrateful for.
Sure, right.
But as time goes on, it's essential that you treat yourself humanely, or you just run yourself into the ground. I want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right, right. So working with someone like Satriani or Steve Vai, it's their show, and they're the soloist and the writer and all of that, and yet you're also a solo artist yourself. And you have how do you balance that when you step into the position of being in their band, with also being a solo artist?
It's you just keep a firm awareness of what reality is. I know that this is the Satriani tour. I know that he's the reason that people have bought the tickets and that they're there. And I'm not going to be the guy that insists that I place my stamp on the proceedings any more than I'm already doing, which is a lot. Because Joe does depend on my musicianship and my instincts to do whatever I can do within my portion of his compositions to make the stuff work. And so I'm fully engaged, and it's just engaging a different part of me. And then the first 3 years I was in Satriani's band, I was only playing keyboard. And then finally he said, I think I'll get you on guitar on some stuff. Oh, that's cool. He said maybe 3 tunes in the show. Oh, okay, whatever. And then I started playing guitar in the show, and he started digging it. He started liking that push and pull, and saying, oh no, let's do more stuff. And so by the end of the last tour, I was fully, more than half the show, like 13 songs I was playing guitar on, and trading solos and really improvising with him. Which is fun. Because I think that there is a perception that Joe is orchestrates everything down to the bone, but the reality is that he's really jamming during a large portion of the show. He's improvising and trying new things, and so I'm grateful that he's like it's composition in a sense, because that's what improvisation is. It's what solo. When you're really doing an improvised solo, you're doing composition. It's just instantaneous, and it kind of flies away into the ether,
Right.
But you're trying to create something that's worthwhile in the moment for the people that are in that room. And also when Joe and I are trading solos, we're trying to spark each other to do something really interesting. So we really push each other to some interesting places, and that's super exhilarating, inspiring thing, especially just because he's so phenomenal. He's such a capable guitar player, it's crazy. And he really strikes that balance between playing things that are musically satisfying, but also just continually hitting the mark that his audience requires. He's extremely cognizant of what his fans love about his music, and he's kind of there to serve them, and I really see the value in that. As I came up with this almost, and part of it is the Zappa thing. His approach to music making was so individualized and personal, and in some ways, anti-show business. It's entertainment, but it's sort of like anti-entertainment in a way. It's,
right.
It's the making you sort of like question all the received, accepted notions of what entertainment can be. And then when I was in Dweezil's band for the years after that, it was really like just this anti-rock band kind of, even though we were really rocking hard up there. We were constantly turning all the conventions of live concerts on their head, and the way you pace a show, like in the middle of the show, we would launch into this medley of songs from the 70s, and it was over 200 songs, and the medley lasted for a half an hour.
Wow.
And it was the type of thing, it's almost like the Andy Kaufman thing, where it goes so far past being funny that it becomes funny again.
Right.
And that's the area where I was like fascinated to reside for a long time. It's sort of just this perverse urge to just see how how wrong you can be so that it becomes right again.
Right.
And Joe's not about that. Joe is like, a really reliable showman, and he like satisfies an audience in a really, really compelling way. And that's, the older I get and the less of kind of a punk I am of wanting to just sort of like, does this bug you? Does this bug you? It's like there's no reason why you should be super confrontational to somebody who's paid a ticket to come enjoy your music.
Sure.
Steve Vai is the same way. I had this almost precious attitude about improvising or playing guitar solos on stage. Like I would never want to learn a guitar solo. I thought that did John Coltrane learn his solos? No, man. You're supposed to just head off into the ether. But with Steve, when I was in his band and he was playing solos that he had painstakingly crafted in the studio, and I finally realized it's not a solo, it's a composition. It's like when he plays For the Love of God, he's not just playing a guitar solo, he's playing a composition in a very specific way. And then I look out in the audience and they're in ecstasy because he's executing exactly what's on the record perfectly, and they know every note, and they're playing along with it and they're singing along with it and they're swooning, and that I see, wow, that affects people in a way that an improvised solo almost never can, unless you're just like so brilliant that you're able to touch the stars every time you play a solo. It's a crapshoot, whereas if Steve goes out and he plays For the Love of God perfectly the way it was on the record, that's guaranteed to satisfy every person in the audience that loves that song,
Right.
So it's a different kind of experience, and I finally realized I was actually being closed-minded about it. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? We're trying to share something of ourselves, and we're trying to make people happy. We're trying to touch people. Vai totally touches people. The Satriani music reaches people in a deep, deep way.
Right.
All that stuff is real food for thought for me, because I am an unusual artist, and I like avant-garde stuff and super experimental stuff, and I love Captain Beefheart and The Residents and Henry Cow and all this stuff that most people would go, what? That's exciting to me. That's super cool. And there are flavors of that in my music all the time. These dissonant constructions and strange things and left turns and stuff. But after a certain point, you kind of just want to make a song that makes people go,
Right.
that just makes people feel good.
Right.
And that's where I started. The first music that I loved was the Beatles. That's the ultimate feel-good music. That was like a magic thing that happened that everybody could feel.
Right.
But I guess ultimately what I love is just good music. Whatever it is.
Sure. You're balancing.
Yeah, balance.
That,
that's the thing.
Interestingly, though, I think a lot of artists, especially when you're talking about experimental stuff or pushing the boundaries or trying to take a left turn, there's an element of fear there for many artists, that they're afraid of how somebody's going to respond. Am I going to be able to sell this? How's this going to go over? How do you not succumb to that?
Well, I've been fortunate in that I do get gigs with Steve Vai and Satriani and Death Clock, and that's been able to subsidize my life to the point that when I make my own records, I've been working in a business structure. I've got my own label, XOX Recordings, that is run by Scott Chatfield, who has been my manager since 1998, and he set up an environment for me where I can just create freely, and so it's been a luxury in that all I've had to do when I make my records is just try to get the stuff that's out of my head and put it in a medium where other people can hear it and hope that it has some meaning for them.
Right.
If I was attempting to make a living playing my own music and only that, then that would have shifted my priorities and things would be completely different. It's only because that I've been able to support myself doing these other jobs that I have the luxury to follow my muse that way.
Right. So I guess the moral of the story is to have kind of two sides to it. One side that supports you so that you can be free to do the other.
And that's why, especially nowadays, where it becomes increasingly unlikely that you're at anyone, even at levels that appear to be successful. You'll see bands that that are touring all the time and are making records, and people like their records, and you think, oh, they must be doing okay, and then you find out that they're struggling. You know,
Right.
It's just not easy.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no shame in like saying, yeah, I'm working 9 to 5. I've got this gig that subsidizes my life, and then when I get home at night, I'll get on the computer. I'll work on music for a couple hours, or maybe on the weekends, or I'll go out with my buddies and play in a bar or something. If that's somebody will say that to me, like, I'm not really a musician. I only play on weekends, or I'm only able to work on the computer every once in a while and stuff because I've got this gig. And I go, no, that's great. That's really cool, because you're not struggling and you're not panicked about the fact that the music isn't paying for your life. You have a thing that pays for your life, and then you're able to do music for the best reason to do music, which is that you love it. And so there ain't nothing wrong with somebody who's got a 9 to 5 gig and just does music when they can. It's the challenge, of course, is just making the time and having the energy.
Right.
And that's just something that we all need to
that's true
work
regardless.
through. Yeah, at any level, that you just gotta prioritize.
Right. So I have one more question for you, and I like to ask this to musicians and artists who are on the Sweetwater Minute, who are as accomplished as yourself and who work with really accomplished people. You've worked with Steve Vai, Satriani, all these people we've mentioned, Henry Kaiser, Andy West, and some of these tremendous musicians. What is it that makes a great musician?
Well, I guess I think it is when someone has a voice that is theirs alone. A unique musical fingerprint, and when you can sort of trace their body of work and see that they haven't stood still, they haven't been complacent, they haven't continually made the same album over and over,
Right.
And especially if somebody is fortunate enough to do it for decades, if you can look at the latter part of their career and see that it's really difficult to keep inspiration at its peak form, and as bodies decay, it's sometimes difficult to keep facility and technique in peak form. But you can be aware of that, and you can still just not get lazy. It if you can sense when an artist has just becomes complacent about making records and just, oh, that's good enough.
Right.
That's disheartening to me. And there have been artists that I really loved at a certain point in their career, and then you can tell at a certain point that they stopped caring, and at that point it's difficult for me to still care.
Right.
So what I love is just any artist that keeps going, and just keeps trying new things, and don't rest on their laurels. And even if you can't necessarily say, well, they just put out their 30th album, and maybe it's not blazing with the fire of creativity that their first album had. I don't expect that of anybody. That's unrealistic to expect of anybody.
Sure.
That's for internet commenters to complain about. All I want to feel is that they're still striving for something. So I guess basically what I'm looking for is just a unique voice, somebody that offers something to the world musically that only they can offer, which technically is everybody, because everybody is unique.
Sure.
But too many musicians, hone their skills to a point where they're almost like, a reasonable facsimile of something else that we've all heard, and they're satisfied with that. I'm not judgmental. I don't give anybody, a hard time over that. I'm just saying in terms of what I want to listen to and devote the limited time I have for listening to anything. I really just want to feel that there's something unique and committed and heartfelt about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
You're doing the recording workshop in the studios, and you're doing a master class tonight. Is that
Doing
right?
a master class tonight.
Right. Is that guitar? Is that keyboard? Is it both?
Both.
Nice.
Philosophy, bowling, whatever.
Awesome, bowling. How to pick up a spare.
Right, exactly. It's
Or
important.
cribbage. I hear you're a cribbage. You
Oh
have
yeah,
been a cribbage.
that's when I was hanging out with XTC a lot. They got well, and even on the Zappa tour, it was Bruce Fowler pretty much, the trombonist in the Zappa band. I have him to thank for the cribbage addiction.
Nice. Scambot 2 is coming soon.
Scambot 2, I'm hopeful will be out in October.
Awesome.
I'll be finishing it next week with any luck.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then the Shockwave Supernova tour with Joe Satriani.
Satriani, that starts in Europe in September. We'll be going from September to November, and then we'll be here in the States in February, March.
Nice. Yeah. And do you have time in there for Beer for Dolphins gigs here and there, or Death Clock, or things going on too?
Yeah, well, I heard a rumor that there might be more Death Clock action next year, so fingers crossed about that. Beer for Dolphins at this point is a trio with Joe Travers, who's very busy working in the tape vault at the Zappa house. It's his day gig, which is a nice day gig. That's nice work if you can get it.
Right, right.
Just going into Frank's tapes and finding amazing unreleased things to grace the world with.
Right.
And then the bass player is Brian Beller, who's also in Death Clock and Joe Satriani, because I keep getting him gigs, and he's in the Aristocrats with Guthrie Govan and Marco Miniman, and they're on the road right now. So the fact that the other two guys in my band at this moment are both extremely busy, as am I, definitely eats into the time for Beer for Dolphins gigging, but we'll make it happen one way or
Absolutely.
another.
Right. Right. Awesome. So much great stuff going on. Thanks for taking time to be here. We really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure.
I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.
That was a minute.
At least a minute. Maybe a little more.